Welcome to the Westport Library. Today's program will begin momentarily. Supported by Verso Studios, created locally and shared with the world.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and welcome to the Chamber of Commerce Candidate Forum Debate for 2024. We have 6 candidates, 3 incumbents, 3 challengers, and they are Dominique Johnson and Peter Bang, vying for the 143rd Representative District. We have Cami Evans and Ceci Maher, looking for the 26th Senatorial District, and Jonathan Steinberg and John Bolton for the 136th Representative District. I want to thank the Westport Library for hosting this debate. We've done it many years with them, and the impeccable job that they do and their staff. I want to thank all the members of the staff for being out here and setting this up for an interesting debate. I want to thank Bill Harmer, Executive Director for the library, for always supporting the things that the Chamber does, and the Chamber in turn supports whatever the library wants to do. This is an open discussion debate. We ask questions, there are rebuttals, and then a discussion among all 6 of them. So it's not as if whoever gets the question and the opposite person gets to answer. We see where it goes with the questions. We will start with a 1-minute opening address by each of the candidates. It will start from your left to our right, or your left to your right, and they'll have 1 minute each to speak. Go ahead, Dominique Johnson.
Thank you very much, Matt. It's wonderful to be here with you all, and thanks to the library and the Chamber here in Westport, Weston for this opportunity for us to have this community conversation and share some of the good work we've done and also what the things we want to do together are into the future. 2 years ago, I was on this stage with you, and I made a promise to you that I would work for you. And that promise was to bring and to serve integrity, bring compassion, respect, and communication, and deliver results. And we delivered results. I rolled up my sleeves, I pulled those boots up, and we got to work. Even sometimes pushing some bills through the mud, as it were, to get them unstuck. We rolled up our sleeves, got to work building relationships with people across the aisle, also people all across our government. I'm proud to say that I've developed these relationships so I can leverage them for us and our communities. A question I ask before I take every vote is, how is this best for our community? And that guides me to make impact, to work across the aisle to get things done, and to make sure that we always put service first, lifting those of us around us up as we go. Thank you, and I look forward to our conversation today.
Thank you. Mr. Bang.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Winston Churchill was described by saying, "Those who forget their history are doomed to repeat it." In 2017, Connecticut was in trouble. Spending was rampant, liabilities were enormous, and years of dysfunction brought us to the brink. Our capital city of Hartford was weeks away from bankruptcy. We're at risk of steering the ship right back in that direction, and that's largely at the helm, with Democrats at the helm. We need to simply stop bad legislation. It's as simple as that. I'm a first-generation immigrant. My parents emigrated from Denmark when I was a toddler, and I've been blessed to live in Southern Fairfield County for most of my life. I've had a very successful career in finance, and this is my opportunity to give back to the community that has given me and my family so much. There are 3 key issues that I would fight for you in Hartford. The first and most important is keeping those fiscal guardrails in place, making sure that we are competitive from a fiscal standpoint, as well as from, Time.
I got this.
Ms. Evans, 1 minute.
Thank you. I'm so grateful to be running for State Senate District 26 as a Republican cross-endorsed by the Independent Party. I believe the current administration is stuck in the past, and it's time for an innovative, future-focused solutions that prioritize fiscal responsibility, local control, and sustainability. My family has long been involved in sustainability, in recycling, and I'm committed to driving environmental progress in our communities. One of my core passions is youth empowerment, particularly through sports and mental health support. As the director of Youth Sports Empowerment Foundation, a division of a gymnastics and cheerleading academy in Fairfield, I've worked to keep kids engaged in sports while addressing their mental health needs. I believe in keeping kids active is essential for the whole community and building resilience, discipline, and a strong sense of community. I've also hosted sustainability events at the Wakeman Town Farm on numerous occasions. I've raised over $3 million across 16 nonprofits in Fairfield County, and I'm not going to stop doing that. I'm up with time, sorry.
Thank you. Can all of you see the timer
Yes.
clearly?
Yeah.
Okay, just want to make sure.
I think it just takes time to get used to the time.
Sure. Ceci Maher.
Hi, good morning. I'm so glad to be here. Thank you so much, Matt, for pulling this all together, and thank you to the library. And I just got to do a shout out. Thank you for cups of water instead of disposable plastic bottles. I think Sustainable Wilton would be thrilled to see it. So I know I just used 15 seconds. Okay, I have been working the past 2 years serving the community of the 8 towns that I am representing, doing things on the state level to address issues of child behavioral health, making sure that I worked on environmental bills that unfortunately didn't get called, but I'm very committed to make sure that they get called this year, and responding to the needs of constituents when they call me, when they reach out to me, and talking to them about the things that matter the most to them. That is the background that I bring to this, of being a responsive legislator, but also a responsive person. So thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you. Mr. Steinberg.
I've had the honor of representing Westport in the state legislature for the past 14 years. After 7 years serving on the RTM, 3 as deputy moderator. I love this town. I came back here with my family. I'm a product of Westport schools. I had my Staples 50th reunion this past weekend, and my 3 children enjoyed the same wonderful community and educational experience that I had. You'll see me around town and at meetings because I care a lot about the community. Do a shout out tomorrow night here at the library at 6, the downtown charrette. Everybody should stay invested and pay attention to these things. I have the experience and relationships in Hartford to be effective and to find ways to solve problems. I want to return to Hartford to further these interests, whether they be budget accountability, sensible gun reform, reasonable, affordable housing laws, or protecting everyone's rights. I encourage you to pay close attention to this debate to learn about our differences. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, Mr. Bolton.
And good afternoon, everybody. My name is John Bolton. For those who don't know you, I am a Westport resident since 1997. I am a P&Z commissioner. I am an attorney, and most important, I am a dad. I love this town as much as everybody else up here on this dais tonight. This town's been incredibly good to me and my son and my son's mom, and it's a huge motivation for why I want to represent and carry the flag of Westport, not a red flag, not a blue flag, but the flag of Westport to Hartford, because this town has a great story to tell. I really feel that I am uniquely qualified this year to be sent to Hartford and represent Westport, because I'm very much in touch and very in tune with the pulse of this electorate. Call it timing, call it luck, but in the last year and a half, we've had a record turnout at zoning for things like the Long Lot School and the gardens. I know where everybody stands in this town. And everybody's here today, I'm sure, to know and listen about what we're going to talk about, the big elephant in the room, which is 830G. So with your help, I want you to send me to Hartford so that I can now start to do the hard work that has to be done. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bolton. There will also be 1-minute closings at the end in the opposite direction of the dais. And so now we're going to start our questions. We've set up basically 6 questions, and they'll be asked of each of the different candidates at different appropriate times as we move through it. Just to let you know, my name's Matthew Mandell, and I'm the executive director of the chamber. I neglected to say that when I started off. So let's get to the questions. The first one is going to Dominique Johnson. Guardrails. An easy discussion when talking about highway safety. But what about guardrails when it comes to spending? In 2017, bipartisan legislation created guardrails that then generated 4 straight years of surplus and allowed a significant pay down of pension debt. Yes, these guardrails are now being questioned by some. There seem to be 3 positions. 1, spend it on new concepts, bolster existing ones, or on new infrastructure improvements. 2, decrease taxes where possible, aid to residents, or 3, leave the guardrails in place? Where are you on the spectrum, and what would you do?
Thank you for that question. That is one of the questions, I think, when it comes to how we're going to address affordability in our state, which to me is perhaps the biggest priority from what I've been hearing on the doors and in the community. We have, over the past 2 years, contributed the largest rainy day fund in state history. We're maxed out at $3.3 billion. It's one of the biggest in the country. Since 2020, we've made over $7.7 billion additional in payments to our pension funds to pay those down. That's fundamentally helping our children's generation not carry that debt. I think it's very important. We are saving billions because of that. We also, at the same time, were able to wipe out $1 billion in medical debt. So I'm saying all this to say that it's been possible, because of the guardrails, to do much of this work. We also gave the biggest tax cut in state history over the past 2 years. That fundamentally means that our working families and our middle-class families are seeing real results in their bottom line and in their kitchen table budgets here. Moving to the future, there is a lot of conversation. I think there may even be more than 3 options, potentially, as to what we could do, and we're already in conversation with it. I'm very proud to serve in the chamber that is, our Appropriations Committee is led by Representative Walker from New Haven, who I think does a wonderful job of trying to balance the fiscal health, the stability, but as well making sure our families have their needs met all across the state. So Rep. Walker, I know, is already working very hard on some possible solutions to this. One thing that is being discussed is addressing what the volatility cap is. The guardrails, as I've come to understand it over the past 2 years, are a set of things together. They're not just one giant thing, right? So among the guardrails are a volatility cap that I think we should explore how we could perhaps tweak the dials on it to see if we can, in fact, use some of these funds in a responsible way to meet some of the upcoming needs that we are definitely going to see, especially after these federal funding cliffs are starting to hit our communities. And of course, we need your feedback about what is best for our families as we move through this process in the next 2 years. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Mr. Bang, 1-minute rebuttal.
It is surprising to me that when we have experienced folks on the stage who are combating against folks who are new to the political game, that there isn't a better appreciation of some of the details around. True, $3.3 billion in a rainy day fund, $7.7 billion paid down. There's still $100 billion in unfunded accrued pension liabilities. That's for our service professionals, our firefighters, our police officers, our government employees, unfunded, unaccrued. So what does that mean? Do we really have the financial luxury of increasing additional feel-good projects? We'd love to do that. We do need the rainy day fund. Thank God it's at a place where it can be. Let's talk about the volatility cap. That is something I would expect an elected officer to well understand. It relates to capital gains. If there are no capital gains because of a decrease in the stock market, guess what? That's a reduction in our ability to fund important programs. We're not prepared for long-term positions when we have $100 billion still yet to go in unfunded liabilities.
All right, thanks. So now we're going to open it to a discussion, but I'd like to follow up quickly. If we're supposed to be paying off the pension, and how do we keep the guardrails in place? Just to throw that back out to you.
To me specifically?
Yeah,
okay.
You brought it up.
Okay, so we need to chip away at the pension, and the issue that you proposed was, do we have the ability to fund additional infrastructure? Should we reduce taxes? Or the third was leave the guardrails in place. We need to leave the guardrails in place and work our way down through that. It's tough medicine, but having free candy isn't the right way to approach things over the long term. And what the biggest problem with 30 or 40 years of one-party rule is you end up wanting to give free candy to all the constituents when we need to plan, just as when there's a recession, your family tightens its budget. We choose not to go on expensive vacations. So why is it that the government wants to give freebies and say, hey, I'm gonna give a little bit back when we have this massive problem that we wanna push away?
All right, Ceci, you wanted to talk about that?
I did, thank you so much. The amount of unpaid pension debt is closer to 40 billion. I know this is a lot of money, and we have paid down 8
You're
billion.
excluding the OPB and the.
Excuse me, sir, I'm speaking. So we have about 40 billion in our pensions that we have paid down 8 billion, which has freed up close to $645 million a year to put into programs, money that otherwise would have been paying, we would have been paying in interest payments. Now, the state treasurer has done Eric Russell has done a tremendous job with our investments. We were not in a good place with our investments, and he has shown a far greater return than has been done in the past. Looking at the fiscal guardrails, I think that what Representative Johnson said about the volatility cap is the place that we're going to have to look. I do want to point out that 2 years ago, when we just started the legislative session that year, we voted to retain our guardrails for the next 5 years, and that we would revisit them. Originally, we talked about doing it for 10, but then we said 5, we would revisit them in 5. So we are committed, we have voted on that, it passed, and therefore we will be looking at other ways that we can free up funding. I do take exception to the idea of giving out gifts and candy, which I do not think we do. As a former nonprofit executive director, I know for a fact that nonprofits have become the front line of defense in social services, and they are underfunded and have been underfunded for years.
Ceci, let me.
Oh, I'm sorry, am I done?
That's okay. And we got to get used to the format.
Okay.
Take a minute and change. Yeah, no, we're going 4 minutes. Dominique, you raised your hand quickly before. Do you want to? Are you not? Mr. Steinberg?
As a champion of the fiscal guardrails, I just want to clarify one point. By paying down $8 billion in pension debt, we save $700 million annually in that debt obligation. Recently, we used that for the biggest tax cut in Connecticut's history. Going forward, we will need to use it for infrastructure investments and things of that nature. And more importantly, as the gentleman said, if we see a downturn in the market and the expiration of federal funds, we will need that $700 million to apply elsewhere. It gives us the flexibility to maintain a sustainable budget. The guardrails are critically important, and I will defend them when I go back to the legislature this coming January.
Thank you. Mr. Bolton?
I know I have very limited time to weigh in, but
15, 20 seconds.
No, it's okay. It's an important topic. But I'm just going to add, because I think that it's been vetted up here on the dais on both sides, but let me just say that I have an intellectual issue with the way the question was phrased, because there's a presumption that we really have a surplus. I'm not sure we do. If you take that ARPA money away and you take federal DOT money away, I'm not so sure Connecticut is in the fiscal health that is being promoted to be in. In fact, it is ranked by U.S. News and World Report to be the most 49th out of 50 states of fiscal stability. That's not good. And so when you talk about whether or not this exists, I'm not sure that this wonderful surplus, which is really a function of fancy accounting, which a lot of people out there are a lot better at it than I am. But I'm not so sure that we're really talking about a real surplus. So when we hear about new concepts, that's a license to spend. When we hear about decreasing taxes, not sure we have that luxury yet. Do we keep it in place? Well, we could if we stop with legislation that's going to bring a ton of costs over there, over there, and over there. And as we get into this over the next 90 minutes or so, I'll highlight to you where I think the fiscal guardrails might even be a moot issue. But it is my opinion that we need to just keep them in place for now as best we can. And by the way, if there was responsible legislation coming out of Hartford over the past 10, 15, or 20 years, ask yourselves, would we need fiscal guardrails in the first place?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, now we're going to skip to the next set of candidates, and this question will go to Cami Evans. Jobs and workforce. CT continues to lag the country and the Northeast in job growth, despite currently having nearly 90,000 job openings, of which nearly half do not require a college degree. The labor force, those looking plus those working, has declined by 30,000 since pre-pandemic and is under pressure to worsen due to Connecticut having the third oldest workforce in the country, with 27% of the workforce over 55 years and older. And the job seekers we'll still have more than 25,000 open jobs with 0% unemployment. As a result, businesses have been expanding outside of Connecticut instead of growing at a level that they could keep Connecticut, and this will hurt residents in our economy. What policies would you advocate for to grow the labor force and to fill these open jobs?
Great question. I am new to learning about the current legislation, but what I can share with you is my personal experience as an innovator, as a person who runs a small business, as well as being on a nonprofit. And the biggest challenge that we have is that we're losing our talent because it's too expensive to stay in Connecticut, especially Fairfield County. I recently went for a mortgage and I found out that if you're in Fairfield County, you can get an FHA loan almost $275,000 more than the rest of the USA. So you can get $480,000 anywhere else in the US, but Fairfield County, you can get over $720,000 for an FHA loan. So affordability is a huge issue. We need to also find opportunities to keep the talent in Fairfield County and in Connecticut. We're losing it to places that are less expensive to live, places that don't have this energy crisis where it's, pricing us out of our own homes, places where our seniors can't, even if they sell their homes, they can't stay. I mean, everybody knows myself, I live in 850 square feet in town. I'm trying my best to be sustainable, raising 2 kids on my own. And also, it's been very difficult for me running for office because I had to pause my business in order to run for what I truly believe I'm going to add value, because I have that perspective to bring up to Hartford. I think there's a tremendous amount of opportunities to also make sure that we give offerings for our first responders, our teachers, our pediatricians, where once they graduate, they don't want to stay locally because it's too expensive to pay back their loans. Thank you.
All right, Ms. Maher, 1 minute rebuttal.
Thank you. I don't actually buy into this belief system that everything is dark and dystopian and terrible and going down the tubes. In fact, Connecticut's economy grew 3.1% in the past 2 years, which is better than any other New England state and above the US average of 2.7. And our manufacturing is one of our bright spots in our state. And Dan O'Keefe, who is our Commissioner of Economic and Community Development, is a tireless advocate for going around and bringing in businesses to our state. In fact, technology, software, and information industries are all growing really strongly in Connecticut. New Haven is a hub for the biotech, and we are seeing a huge amount of growth in that area. And the manufacturing sector has started growing again for the first time in years. So we're in a way better place than it's being presented.
All right, who wants to talk about this? Mr. Bolton.
I do, because the Federal Reserve recently opined that Connecticut has 8 straight years of a decreasing GDP. So I'm not sure where my friend Ceci is getting her numbers from. And also Connecticut lags behind the entire region of New England in terms of growth and jobs. And quite frankly, it's an embarrassment. And there's no reason for that, because Connecticut, for whatever reason, has a reputation of having a great industry of creating poverty with its programs and its poor spending habits. That's what happens when you have a supermajority for almost 50 years in this state. It really is. But my point is this. I don't like to use the word dark and dystopian. One of the nice things about being a challenger and not an incumbent is that I don't have to paint a rosy picture to justify a re-election. Fact of the matter is, numbers are numbers, and it's not as rosy as it's being presented to you. Is it horrendous out there with a bunch of zombies running around looking to kill everybody in the dark of night? No, it's not. But it's not nearly as rosy as everybody is trying to make it out to be. And we have to have a hard conversation, folks. We have to be honest with everybody here on every issue. And it's not. It's not a hard, we're not getting honest representations on that.
Thank you. Mr. Steinberg.
I'm not going to gild the lily. Connecticut has suffered since our manufacturing base left in the 1980s. For 30 years, Democrat or Republican governors, we had no economic strategy. That's really changed a lot in the past 10 years. A big focus, as was mentioned, on the bioscience industry, where we can develop a differential advantage and create a sustainable ecosystem. Similarly with the green tech sector. New opportunities for Connecticut to own a piece of this industry in a way in which it's defensible over the long term. We've also put a lot of investments in identifying tech talent. We have a tech talent accelerator, so we can find and retain the best talent. We have certificate programs whereby people from vocational schools are working on the very equipment they will be using once they graduate right into jobs where we have opportunities. One of the interesting things about Connecticut, very highly educated workforce, but that workforce has to be dedicated where the jobs are, and we have open jobs, and we need to continue to fill those jobs with programs like we put in place in Connecticut.
Thank you. Mr. Bang?
Yeah, if I'd like to jump in here. Look, biosciences, green energy, your favorite sector of choice, what we need to do is make our workforce and our regulation, our regulatory regime, accommodative to all industries, to the small business, to the baker who wants to open up a shop, to the real estate broker, to small businesses and large businesses alike. And terrific, we're a little bit better than the rest of New England. Hallelujah. What about where we stack up nationally? We're still in the dumps. And that's because of a regulatory regime that makes it very, very difficult to have a small business and therefore attract talent to it. So rather than curry favor with one industry sector that's au courant and interesting today, why don't we make us a competitive state across all sectors? That's the right way to approach legislation. Rather than picking winners and losers, let's make it competitive across the board.
All right. Ms. Johnson?
Thank you. I have been proud to work on some initiatives in this very area of workforce development. One of them was writing and introducing the Green Jobs Corps bill on the House floor. I did that because we needed a way to get, as my colleague Representative Steinberg said, a way to get these young people into pathways for these jobs through apprenticeships, through training, and into these jobs. Our employers were saying that we had a mismatch, which we still have. We have, unfortunately, jobs that are unfilled because we need to be training people to fill them. So that is going to be a very important point going forward. Lastly, Governor Lamont has turned this ship around, I think, in a way that I think he deserves much credit for. And I've been proud that we've been part of what he's doing. Part of that is making businesses' life a little easier in this state. We always should be thinking of our small businesses first because they're most of our businesses in this state. We've cut the number of reporting requirements, cut business taxes to promote expansion for our family childcare business, which I think we need to do even more of. And we've also made the pass-through entity tax optional. So these are things I think that if we keep on that track, we're going to be making even more progress under the Lamont administration.
All right. Anybody else before we move to the next question? We're good? Cami, you did?
Well, I talked for so long. I was just going to add that we also need to encourage other pathways beyond high school, where not every student needs to go to 4 years of college, and there should be opportunities for them to be encouraged to find alternative pathways, whether it's a postgraduate year, whether it's a gap year, whether it's a trade, but to really encourage those opportunities for all students when they're graduating high school.
Thank you. To my timekeeper, there are 2 screens up there.
Okay.
Could
Which one do you like?
let's stick with one. Okay, thank you. All right, next question. This one goes to Mr. Steinberg. Energy costs was brought up in the last question, and here it comes. Connecticut has some of the highest cost of living in the country, with property taxes as well as income taxes being rather high. But what most residents and businesses complain about is the high cost of energy. Eversource is always asking for higher rates, and the need for stronger infrastructure seems to have them on the back of their feet to the point of them wanting to sell Aquarian. You were recently given the co-chair of the Energy Committee. What will you do to help decrease the cost of energy and the impact on the state?
First thing I won't do is promise you that I can bring down energy prices by myself. The price of energy will fluctuate as it always has, primarily based upon the price of natural gas. The additional fees that you're paying currently will expire in March. That was a decision made on a bipartisan basis in 2017. What I will tell you that if we're going to remain a competitive state and maintain our quality of life, We need to make critical infrastructure investments to upgrade our electric grid so that it's able to deal with storage and EVs and all sorts of other things that we never anticipated, and to build out our regional transmission network so we can bring energy from all over the place to Connecticut, because we need it, fossil fuel or renewable energy. We're going to need to supplement our energy in order to meet our current needs. And then we have the great disruptor, AI and data centers, which are tremendous energy sucks. It's a national crisis. We have to make sure that we secure Connecticut's energy future. That's really what I want to focus on. Building out the infrastructure, finding the adequate supplies. And I'll add the last point, which relates to the question. We have put the utilities back on their heels, as you put it. We passed important legislation as part of what we called our Take Back the Grid Act, which now holds the utilities accountable. Before, they used to submit their bills and we'd rubber stamp them and send them on their way. Now, they only get their rate of return that they expect if they do a quality job on a timely basis. PURA, our regulatory authority, is now holding them accountable. The legislation that I helped pass is going to make a difference going forward. Yeah, utilities also made some really bad investments, which is why they're desperate to sell Aquarian, why they're constantly complaining about PURA. Our regime is a model for the rest of the country. Now, I started out by saying I am not going to lower your energy rates. My job is also to strike the right balance and make sure we don't raise your rates unnecessarily. That's a very subtle job, but one that I'm prepared to take on.
Thank you very much. Mr. Bolton, 1 minute rebuttal.
Absolutely, thank you. So here's the secret and the issues regarding this that you're not being told. Part of your utility bills are high because of the public benefits charge, and there is nobody up here that's going to disagree that government's function is to protect the truly needy and provide a safety net. If you have a problem with that, well, that's your problem, but what's happening here is far beyond that limited mandate. You also have, in the public benefits charge, pet projects, like what we're hearing earlier about the green energy projects and the corridors for technology and whatnot. This is a tax that we're all paying, and it's a backdoor tax. And it's to fund legacy projects for the supermajority. Now, I don't have a problem with looking into how to modernize our economy and whatnot, but the fact of the matter is, don't blame this solely on Millstone. You had $800 million and 10 months to pay it back. And you had a moratorium that was also imposed on the utility. 4 years, they were not allowed to turn off anybody's electricity because of COVID. I get it, but 4 years? The governor confessed a month or two ago, well, maybe it was a little bit too long. Tell that to the widow who can't afford to have heat this winter.
All right, thank you. All right, who else would like to weigh in on energy and costs?
Yeah,
Mr. Bank grabs the microphone. All right.
let me take that one. So this is very interesting. You heard from a Democratic incumbent that something was never anticipated. How rich is that? Look, the problem is when you're 4 or 5 decades with one-party control, you end up with not thinking through things. So again, Mr. Bolton had a great point. That 30% that's being added on, we're all in favor of giving to the needy. Let's make it explicit. Let's not have a regressive tax to 30% of all of our utility bills in order to fund pet projects. By all means, let's take care of the needy, but let's do it explicitly. Let's put it in the general budget, and let's not burden small businesses and others who are at the margin of real financial distress with a 30% surcharge on their electric bills. These are not things that are complicated. These are things that are bred out of dysfunction in Hartford and a lack of thinking through unintended consequences of policies. It's very simple. Let's elect people who think through things and are willing to resist pet projects and think about what's right and what doesn't have the unintended consequences of making it harder for others on fixed incomes.
Ms. Johnson?
Thank you.
Tammy, you'll be next.
Oh.
No, go ahead, go.
Oh, no, it's okay.
Go, you're it.
All right, I'm up. I won't waste the time. We do have, what's here is an interesting conundrum. Before I was in the legislature, we had the Millstone Agreement in 2017, right, which is most of the public benefits charge, but that was a bipartisan agreement. That was Republicans and Democrats deciding that was what was best at that point for the state. And I can't speak to that, I wasn't in the legislature. So I think that the finger pointing across the aisle doesn't actually help us get to where we need to go together, which is to go to Hartford in January and figure out what are we going to do to stabilize these energy costs for our families. Some of these projects that are in our bills, I just got my bill for the public benefits, we all did. You probably also got that email from Eversource yesterday talking about all these great green energy projects that they're doing and how wonderful they are. And if you need help, apply and we'll help you and you'll pay us a fee and we'll do it. But that's also the public benefit. So in some ways, I feel like Eversource is having its cake and eating it too, because fundamentally we have to decide, are we going to pull that out of public benefits, put it into the state budget? And I think that's an important conversation we need to have. Should this be something that we as the people decide we want to pay in our state budget, not have Eversource charge us in our bills to take care of? And lastly, I think what we need to do in terms of energy is make sure that we are trying to make sure that we hold Eversource accountable, which we did this past session in some small way, which is to make sure that they cannot use our money to lobby for their own interest in the Capitol. So we passed a bill to make sure that they could no longer do that. These are the incremental things we can do, like siting council reform to give more power back to localities about where the power lines come through. I mean, and we're working on it, but I think that fundamentally, when it comes to Eversource, we have to really take a hard look about what we as people want to take care of, because these aren't just gimmies to like corporations, right? This is also real people. And the last thing I'll say is that when we had the moratorium, most of the people whose bills are not paid are businesses that went bankrupt during the pandemic. And unfortunately, Eversource is having us pay the bill right now instead of them accounting for that in their own balance sheets. So, I mean, it affected businesses a lot too. So we're not just, you know, this is families, this is businesses, and this is what we need to do together and not point fingers across the aisle. Thank you.
All right, Ms. Evans.
So I have a business that helps engage communities, and the reason I'm running is because I'm one of the people these guys are talking about. My energy bill came out to over $500, 850 square feet, and I'm paying $500, where 230 of those dollars were public benefits. I'm one of those people that is on the edge, that I could go one way or the other, and this is why I'm running, because I know this voice that I'm speaking on, because it's my voice as well as your voice, and this is what I'm going to bring up to Hartford. I should not be in this position. These decisions have been made, not with me in their mind. There's so many people that come up to me when I'm knocking doors, teachers, single moms. How am I going to pay? What am I going to pay for electricity or for groceries? There have been plenty of times, and I'm not proud of it, to give my kids spaghetti and cucumbers for a week because that's all I could afford because I had to keep the lights on. So this is why I'm running, because I need to make a difference, because it's directly affecting me. And I want to make sure that nobody ever else has to experience what I've experienced.
Ms. Maher.
Thank you.
We're going over the 4 minutes. Just
Yeah,
because.
sorry about that. On the Eversource bills, I do want to point out that the bills that we are all paying for now, because they were kept open during COVID, Eversource is still out there trying to reclaim that money. They're going after all the people who have not paid the bills. And I want to point that out because that was a question that came up to me. Well, if Eversource is going after this money to reclaim it, what happens when we're paying for it and then they are also going after the money? And I was told, and I wanted to share it with all of you, that should they get the money back, all the monies that they get back will be included in the conversation at PURA at their next rate conversation. In the old days, that didn't happen. There was no visibility in that sort of thing, but now there is, because we have PURA and they're doing that work. I also wanted to mention these public benefit bills have always been, public benefits have always been in your bills. It is only in the past couple of years that they have started showing up for what they were, because the legislature passed it because we wanted you to know that you were paying for public benefits. And part of the public benefits are things like paying for the heat for an elderly widow who does not have the money to pay, and the social service pieces that we pass those monies through social service agencies. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else want to?
I know of none of my constituents that take issue at all with that part of the public benefit. But from the department of two heads are better than one, there are 5 seats on Pura. 2 have been vacant at least for the last 2 years. Why? How about 5 are better than 3 heads? It's very simple. Let's get some more competing ideas in there so that we can attack this from both sides of the aisle. I'm bipartisan. Why can't the governor and why can't Pura have a bipartisan approach? Anybody answer that for me?
Well, Mr. Steinberg picked up the microphone.
I can answer that for you. The 4th and 5th seat on Pura are relatively recent. The fact that we haven't filled them is up to the governor. I'm open to the idea of filling them, and the more important thing is not the number, but the people who are on there. We have tried to get away from having political appointees in these positions in favor of people with actual expertise. Our chair is both an engineer and a lawyer, perfect combination for the kind of issues that we face. I would be open to the idea of bringing in people like one of our retiring commissioners who had background in water issues, because we also have purview over water. I'd love to have somebody come in who has financial markets background, who can help us understand the spot market and some of the other things that we're struggling with. So I'm open to the idea of 5. It's not necessarily about the number, though. It's about the quality.
Thank you. Good, we're good? Or you got to say something.
I
Okay, go.
just wanted to add, it's also about someone who is consumer focused, who is looking out for the consumers on Pura. So it is someone who has a background, energy, technology, all of the pieces that we need, but we also need someone sitting there who has, like Marissa Gillette, who is the chairman, we need someone else on there who's thinking about the consumers and the impact that it has on the consumers in Connecticut.
All right, we're halfway through. And now we're going to start back over with the 143rd district. I'm messing that one up each time. And with Mr. Bang answering this question and Ms. Johnson doing the rebuttal. Taxes. Residents and businesses in Fairfield County pay the largest percentage of tax to the state compared to other towns and counties. Greenwich paid almost $1 billion in tax in the last year, and Westport, mathematically due to its size, was not far behind. Wealth, of course, has its benefits, and paying our due is only fair. The question here, do you believe Westport gets back enough from the state for infrastructure and in aiding us to build a new school? What would you do differently in Hartford to so-called bring home the bacon?
It's a great question. Short answer, no. And this is one of the problems. We're the ATM, we're the piggy bank for Hartford. And again, pet projects come in mind. So let's think about the apportionment of funds with respect to schooling. Are we getting our fair share relative to the amount of money that we're spending up? Absolutely not. I think there needs to be a really hard look at how we are being treated across District 143, Norwalk and Westport both, and how we are receiving services relative to what we contribute. This speaks to how our state budget is derived, this goes back to fiscal guardrails in some respects. If you think about that $1 billion figure, you've got that like figure for Westport and Norwalk, and you've got a $20 billion budget up in Hartford. So why can we not have more local control to have agency over our own decision-making around what we want to do and how we are properly compensated for the amount of money that we send up there? That's a very simple thing. And if you think about what Hartford is doing for, I don't know, Essex and Tolland and New London and God knows what communities, how are their unfunded mandates helping us when in fact we're already the piggy bank for Hartford? This is very confusing to me as to why we should continually be on the hook for spending and then being asked to be on top of mandates that are unfunded and in many cases illogical for what's right for the district. It's bizarre that we've allowed our politicians in Hartford to continue with these unfunded mandates.
All right, thank you. Ms. Johnson, 1 minute rebuttal.
Thank you. I want to correct the record. We do not have the same funding realities in Norwalk and Westport. In Norwalk, we have received more as a Norwalk delegation for the city of Norwalk in public education than ever before, ever. We brought back more money for our public schools than ever. And so I think that that's a really important point to mention, because we've seen the need, we've heard from our constituents, we know that we are a school district that is doing better, but we have so much further to go in Norwalk. And so because of that, I've been really proud to work very hard with our delegation, both here in Westport and in Norwalk, to bring back over $100 million back for our nonprofits, to bring that record-setting amount for our school district in Norwalk, to make sure that we support the Mandate Reform Council, and we passed a law on the Education Committee, and we made it through the entire legislature. The governor signed it to bring mandate relief specifically for our schools. So now that council is going to move forward and give us recommendations come January about where we need to look at our mandates to relieve some of this from our local school districts. There's much more we've brought back to Norwalk, but I can guarantee you that it has been a very important distinction to make between Norwalk and Westport and what kind of money we've received from the state. Thank you.
All right, thanks. Thank you. So who wants to talk taxes? Ms. Evans.
I totally agree with my ballot mate here about the unfunded mandates. I think it's ridiculous, and we need to have more common sense, local control. We need to be a part of the conversations for our communities, especially District 26, which has an incredibly affluent constituency. We need to make sure that we are having these conversations. As I'm knocking doors, we don't want there to be a one-size-fits-all. We have to make sure that all the money and the taxes, we are in a very incredibly affluent area here, are supporting what we want, not what is being mandated to us and unfunded. So I totally agree with you.
May I make a...
Mr. Steinberg was next.
There's some reality to the fact that Westport doesn't get necessarily as much money as other towns because we're not as viewed as a community that necessarily needs it. But we work very hard to get appropriate funding for the town. When I first started, we got money for the Saugatuck Co-op Apartments. We got money for the Levitt. More recently, we got money for the Westport Country Playhouse, particularly thanks to Senator Maher. It's not easy. Right now, I engaged with Jay Keenan, the head of the Long Lots Building Committee, so we could maximize the amount of return we get from the state in terms of construction grants, understanding the rules, that if we do certain green things, we get a higher return than we would otherwise. This is the way your legislators work. We work collaboratively. Even when Westport is not necessarily the primary recipient of all these funds, there are cases we can make that make sure Westport gets money when it really needs it. We are blessed to have a community that is in a position to contribute more in taxes to the state. But we also have an obligation in that sense to make sure we get our fair share.
I'm going to go to Mr. Bang. He raised his hand first. Ceci.
Yeah, I heard something that was internally inconsistent just a moment ago. We've received more funding than ever, but we have a long way to go. So does that mean we're receiving enough in Norwalk? Or is it still not appropriate and we need to receive more? That's the point. What we need to do is avoid sloganeering and talking about what gifts we brought back from Hartford, and think about whether we want to send the monies up there to begin with. And think about the manner in which we are distributing our tax dollars and whether we're getting appropriate return for it. And I agree, a town like Westport is different demographically than Norwalk. And terrific that the households in Westport often have the ability to give a little bit more. But let's still think about whether having a recycling of dollars up and then back to us, is that optically interesting to us, or is that the right way to adjudicate public policy? Let's be honest with our constituents, and rather than bury giveaways into a 30% surcharge on our electric bills, let's be honest and put it out front. And if it's a public service that's needed to support people in need, we give it to them, and we're proud of it, rather than squirreling it away in a 30% surcharge, or worse yet, having an unfunded mandate that then our taxpayers need to respond to.
All right, Ms. Maher.
Thanks. I just wanted to correct something that was said earlier by Mr. Bang. We don't have a $20 billion budget. We have a $26 billion budget. Just to think it's important to be clear about how much money the state does work with. So as far as bringing monies back to Westport, I was very thrilled, and thank you, Jonathan, for the shout out. I was really thrilled to be able to bring $2 million back to the Westport Country Playhouse. But also, I want to say, in Stamford, they are putting up a new high school with $260 million worth of funding from the state with really fantastic long-term payback. When I say payback, I mean it's like the percentage of the total cost of it is 80%. The state is paying 80% for this new high school. Jonathan, I'm thrilled you're talking with Long Lots, and I hope you engage me in that conversation, because that is the kind of work a delegation does. We work together to make sure that we bring funding back. And in fact, I look forward in the next term to working with the First Select people in this town to bring back money, as I do with other select people in other towns.
All right, we can continue this conversation past the 4 minutes. Okay. Mr. Bolton?
I'll try to be as concise as possible. Let me just state that the responses from my opponent and the other Democratic counterparts here tonight, or this afternoon, indicate exactly how I started my introduction. I am in touch with the electorate in this town, very much so. And one of the reasons why I can say that is Westport doesn't necessarily gauge the bacon, as it was put in the question, in terms of monetary assistance from the state, okay? It means getting credit for the generosity and the forward thinking from the early 80s and 1970s on affordable housing units. There's about 128 in this town that Hartford does not even recognize as legitimate units of affordable housing. And so we're punished because we were being progressive before everybody else told us to, before that big ugly howitzer called 830G was pointed at this community. And I'm gonna say what everybody is thinking, but too afraid to say. And the fact of the matter is, I lived up in Hartford. I was brought up in West Hartford. I moved here in 1997 because the commute from Hartford to Bridgeport was really killing me, for starters. But the fact of the matter is that there is, unfortunately, a disdain from Hartford for this part of the state. And don't ask me, if you want to go look, just look at some of the comments that have been coming out of the legislators up there. We're hoarders of social capital. That's code for we're a bunch of greedy, selfish SOBs here. Nothing could be further from the truth. And that's where I believe my opponent has failed you, all of you, because Westport has a phenomenal story to tell about everything that it does to help the weaker, the voiceless, and those who are unable, for whatever reason in their life, there but for the grace of God go I, to compete. And that story's not being told, and it's a real problem for me, and it's a big motivation for why I'm running.
Just to let you know, there will be an affordable housing question coming. No, and that's yeah. Ms. Johnson.
Thank you. I will be brief. I wanted to respond because fundamentally, it seems as though my opponent to the left of me here is suggesting that we should stop fighting for Norwalk just because we've got the most public education funding ever, and that's absolutely the opposite. We will keep fighting because we know the need is so great. And I know, based on what I'm hearing, I don't know if there's an awareness of how great the need is, right? But this need, it expands across not just our communities. We have mental health funding coming from Hartford to help our kids. We have mental health crisis centers, and I could go through the litany of all the things, that we have brought money back from, because this is the system we have now, right? And so because of that, we are here for you to fight to make sure that we get some money back for Sherwood Island. $2.5 million, the Playhouse, the Westport Police Department. And then in Norwalk, I have to correct what I said, we have a multi-million dollars back for our local nonprofits in Norwalk and Westport, but over $100 million back for infrastructure grants in Norwalk. So this is the way we can ensure right now, based upon how our system is, to make sure we fight for you. We can have philosophical conversations about should this be changed into the future, how we tax. But the question, I don't think anybody in this room is thinking we should just withhold taxes from Hartford, right? I don't think that's like where we're trying to move. I think we just have to figure out how do we fight to get our fair share back. Lastly, if you look around Westport, we have a new bridge on I-95. We're going to have a new Saugatuck River Bridge. The money that we are fighting for is coming into our communities because of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act, because of the fact that we are visible representatives of this amazing community up in the State House and work with the governor and all of his commissioners to make that happen. And so, again, I think that that is part of this, is making sure you have those relationships and you leverage them. Thank you.
Ms. Evans?
I have an 11-year-old and a 17-year-old, so I get the pleasure of speaking with a lot of parents on a daily basis, not only when I door knock, but when I'm hanging out with my kids' friends' parents. And the one thing that my opponent did was not fight for us for getting the waivers for right to read. We have an incredible opportunity here in our school district in Westport and throughout District 26. And as she just said that she hopes that Representative Steinberg comes and speaks with her about long lots, shivers ran up my spine. I was like, God, the last thing I want to do is have somebody that won't fight for our students and just like go down the party line just because that's what she knows how to do. And the other thing is, I spoke to a lot of families that are very concerned about the current development of the long lot schools and how they're going to bring in the nursery school. And I think we need to bring them into the conversation. And one thing that Representative Johnson just brought up as far as like, these are philosophical conversations and, how do we divvy up the money? At the end of the day, it has to be common sense, local control. We have to focus on what our constituents want. We work for you. I'm not here to tell you what I think is, oh, this is what you should do and this is where the money's going. No, let's have a conversation. We work for you. You send us up there to do the job.
All right, thank you. Ms. Maher, you wanted to respond?
Thank you. First off, I just wanted to speak up to the idea that Fairfield County is considered by those in Hartford to be the cash box and not part of the state. Because in the 2 years that I've been up there in the legislature, in multiple conversations around funding issues, I have never heard that expressed. It is not the case. Our governor comes from Fairfield. Comes from Fairfield County, comes from Greenwich. He understands what the needs are in Fairfield County. He understands what the needs are in our communities and has been tremendously supportive in that way. We are not told that we don't need the money. Our requests, such as Sherwood Island, such as the Playhouse in New Canaan, such as Westport Country Playhouse here, those are looked at and they have been funded, along with many other requests. $147,000 for the police here in Westport for their vests and cameras. There are things that I bring up there to make sure that we get it. Now, on the issue of right to read, I cannot let that go by because that was asked and answered back at the debate last week here in Westport. And I think it was last week, maybe it was 2 weeks ago. And I was present in many, many, many conversations, both with the State Department of Education, with the Superintendent of Schools of Westport, the Superintendent of Schools of Wilton, Superintendent of Schools of Ridgefield, of Stamford. I was talking to them about the right to read legislation, and I was in on conversations between the superintendents of schools and the State Department of Education. Multiple conversations. I worked very hard on that. And so, although I did say this at the debate 2 weeks ago, the information is erroneous, and I hope that you're aware of that. Thank you.
All right, are we done with this? Or?
No, we're not,
We're not.
because the information is not erroneous. You did nothing. You wouldn't fight for our students and our families. Representative Steinberg did do it.
You want to speak to?
And you want the truth, look it all up. You did nothing.
Mr. Bolton?
Yeah, I'll be as quick as I can on this. Listen, stop talking about bacon as if it's just money, okay? Local control is bacon. It's just not appropriations or respect for what we've accomplished in other areas. And with all due respect, Senator, you're tone deaf. Because if you've never heard any of the things that have been alleged about us here down in Fairfield County, then I really don't know what planet you parachuted in from. But look at Senator or Representative Rojas out of East Hartford. Google Go check his quotes about Fairfield County. You're tone deaf.
Thank
We
you.
have to tell our story there, and we have to stop looking at bacon in terms of just dollars and cents, but waivers. And by the way, thank you for the vest for the police, but you know what? You need to give them one more vest. Give them back their qualified immunity that you took.
Now, let's keep the verbiage civil.
Qualified immunity.
Mr. Steinberg was next.
I was really hoping we'd get through these debates with maintaining civility and, more importantly, sticking to the facts. This is the second time that a candidate here has maligned Senator Maher based upon an absolute lack of facts. I was in the room with Superintendent Scarice, with the chair of the Board of Ed, Lee Goldstein, with the Department of Education. Ceci was there all the way. The fact that we didn't succeed, it says more about the bill and about the Department of Education than it does about us, and we have not given up. So I would just wish that you don't repeat non-truths when we've already asked and answered that, because that's not what the people of Westport need to hear.
And
Ms. Maher, do you-
on qualified immunity. On qualified immunity, there was a very narrow change in the qualified immunity. And what that qualified immunity said was that we were not going, if someone knowingly and purposefully harmed in an arrest or after an arrest, then that person did not have qualified immunity. It was very, very narrow. And in fact, there has not been one instance since that bill was passed where a law enforcement officer has been brought up on that issue. So I do not think, I really want to leave it very clear that it was an extraordinarily narrow piece that was about reckless and purposeful harm of a citizen. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else, or we can move on with this? We've exhausted it? Okay. All right, now we're going to move to the Senate district, and Ms. Maher is the question. So we're going to go a slightly different direction here. We're going to talk about abortion rights.
Okay.
The Supreme Court recently nullified Roe versus Wade, freeing up the ability for states to now create obstacles or support to women deciding their own fate as it comes to their choice in dealing with a pregnancy. Some states have almost all but banned abortion. Connecticut, on the other hand, has not. As a legislator, what should Connecticut do moving forward?
So I'm a member of the Reproductive Rights Caucus, and we have had conversations about putting a constitutional amendment in, protecting the right to abortion and protecting a person's bodily rights. There's different thinking on that in the Reproductive Rights Caucus, and so far we have not picked that up. However, there are two other things that we should be doing and strengthening. One is on IVF, to make sure that everyone has the opportunity to have IVF, that is not restricted, and also the issue of frozen embryos. I cannot believe that my daughter does not have the same rights that I had growing up. It is unacceptable to me, and I will always defend everyone's right to make a decision about their own body. Now, the other one is telehealth. We need to strengthen our rules around telehealth for I'm not going to say it right, mifepristone, to be able to give that as a prescription during telehealth. We need to strengthen that. We did do telehealth laws last year that we strengthened, but this was not part of it. So that is something that I will be working on. It is a very big concern for me that we have an environment where, depending on how the election turns out in this next 2 weeks, we might be looking at further restrictions and loss of our ability. The states are the firewall, and I will always be up there fighting for the rights of our constituents. And just know that I believe that they should take their bans off our bodies. It is not okay.
Thank you, Ms. Evans. 1 minute rebuttal.
I've shared this story on multiple debates, and my daughter knows about it, and I'm going to share it now, and it's a little bit triggering. And I'm going to be very clear about the words I use because some people felt I was being coded. First of all, with reproductive rights, you could just put it on the ballot and we could have all of our constituents vote on it. I personally suffered a sexual assault at a young age, and that resulted in me having to have an abortion. I hated saying that word. And my daughter asked me, why don't you say it? And I said, because there's shame. There is shame associated with the act and what I did after that act. Because of that, I feel that there's education that needs to be put in place in addition to reproductive rights, because I did not know if that affected me having children later in life. I was lucky and blessed enough to have a child at 36 and then again spontaneously at 43. But as I was having complications with multiple miscarriages, I didn't know if that abortion affected it. I'll never know. And there has to be education. I was going down the route of IVF. Then I found out if I took antidepressants, I could not adopt from certain countries. But I didn't know that information until that information was shared with me at that moment in time. Yes, reproductive rights, but please, let's educate, make things transparent so that those that are experiencing these challenges, these situations, expanding your family, know exactly what is available for you beyond. And don't get me started past reproductive rights. We need to talk, and I'm sorry for the gentleman in here because this was already too much information. Nobody talks about menopause. Let's go into that conversation at some point. Let's do the whole woman. Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, 4 minutes of discussion. Mr. Steinberg was first. Mr. Bolton, you're next.
Thank you. I'm also a charter member of the Reproductive Rights Caucus, and I'm intensely proud of the state of Connecticut for the legislation we passed to protect the rights not only of our citizens, but even people seeking abortion from other states, coming from the wacko state of Texas, and also protecting providers in that sense. We have more to do. When I chaired the Public Health Committee, we went after the fake pregnancy centers. And if you haven't seen the documentary Preconceived, which really tells you what's going on in this industry, you need to look. It's a national effort to actually track pregnant people and keep them from getting abortions. We went after them. We held them accountable for their fake advertising. There are many fronts in which we have to protect reproductive rights. And let me say, it's not just about reproductive rights. It's about IVF. It's about individual rights that we protect for everybody, because that's what America is.
Mr. Bolton.
Let me just state that I absolutely believe in a woman's right to choose and to do what's right for herself, her conscience, and her doctor in that regard. But there's also reasonable limitations that have to go with that. Now, what those reasonable limitations are, that's part of the hard conversations that I've been talking about. With regard to IVF, I guess timing is perfect, but that wonderful, beautiful young man that just left this auditorium 3 minutes ago, that was my son. He is a product of IVF. I strongly support it because I can't remember what my life was like before he came along, and so I have a lot of gratitude for that area of science. But I want to state one thing. Let's not fan the flames any further about what happened with Roe versus Wade. Ceci's daughter and everybody else's daughter are still growing up with the same rights that she had growing up. What RGB said is the late Supreme Court Justice, she said Roe wasn't good law because it wasn't reasoned properly, and that's what was overturned. It was tortured to come out with a certain result that I think we all agree on, but let's do it the right way. It's now back in the state hands of all the states, and it's a community standard issue. And I truly believe my body, my choice, but let's also use that same mantra when it comes to vaccines.
Mr. Bang?
Yeah. I too have personal experience with IVF, and I'm in support of IVF and having access thereof. Very simply, Roe versus Wade is what the Connecticut legislature accurately codified into being the law of the land here in Connecticut, and that's the right answer, period.
Ms. Johnson?
I want to add that I now, as a middle-aged woman, have less rights than I did when I was born in 1977. I also believe strongly, being a member of the Reproductive Rights Caucus, that we always have to be on the watch in terms of all of our freedoms, specific to our ability to determine our own futures. And this is, to me, the basis of this issue. Are our young people free to determine their own futures? So I will continue to be a representative of our community who believes in these ideas to make sure that we have reproductive freedom in the state of Connecticut, regardless of what may happen, as has been alluded to at the national election. We could be facing a national abortion ban potentially. So I can I can guarantee you that you will have a fighter in terms of making sure that we in Connecticut have our values in me. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me just ask a follow-up question. Ceci talked about telehealth. Jonathan talked about other residents outside of Connecticut. Should Connecticut be looking to help people outside of our state if we continue to be able to support women's rights to choose? Mr. Steinberg.
Anyone?
Yeah. Just still in a discussion. I'm just.
No,
I'll give it to Mr. Steinberg.
I'll kick us off.
Okay, go ahead.
The answer is most definitely yes. It's not costing the state of Connecticut a huge amount of money to protect people against legal incursions by renegade attorney generals in other states. It's not a burden on Connecticut, and I hope other states pick up on that as well. But I also want to correct a statement, in my view, made by my opponent. My body, my choice should not be conflated with vaccines. If it's a matter of abortion rights, that's the individual woman's decision, and nobody else with other beliefs should be making that decision for her. Vaccines are a different thing. Vaccines are related to community immunity. What you decide doesn't just affect you, it affects other people and puts people who are immunocompromised at risk. So using my body, my choice on vaccines really pisses me off. Excuse me.
Mr. Bang.
Yeah, Mr. Steinberg was accurate. As long as it's not an undue burden, terrific. The one concern that I might have is with respect to telehealth, whether or not that would allow folks who are not having those discussions with their parents, with their trusted advisors to you know, go through an accurate and well thought out decision making. Because again, if you're a teenager and became pregnant, are you having the discussion with your mom and your dad? Can telehealth create some unintended consequences? Of course it can. As long as we manage those correctly, I think that's fine. And as long as there's not a large economic burden, which I don't think there would be. I don't think we'd be flying people in from Texas, but if they're coming in of their own volition, terrific. Like you know, there is nothing wrong with, as long as there's not an undue economic burden, you know, providing for reproductive health of folks that are outside of our state, should something happen in the national stage that we're not.
Ms. Maher, then Ms. Johnson.
Okay, so sorry. The conversation thing from Mr. Bang just threw what I was going to say straight out of my brain. But going back to what I think I remember you asked, which was, should we allow other people to come to Connecticut for reproductive health care? 100%. Absolutely. Whether it's over telehealth, whether it's in person, 100% we should be welcoming them. And as a matter of fact, we have been for the past 2 years. So, but the issue of a child having a conversation with their parent, I think the most important thing is for the person to be making that decision for themselves, and that may or may not align with what their parents believe, and that is still a choice for the person who is affected.
Thank you. Ms. Johnson.
I think it's important to have a moment to clarify for voters whether or not Mr. Bang is suggesting a parental notification law is something he would support. This is something we've already discussed in Connecticut, and this is not something that our Connecticut constituents nor values seem to suggest across the whole is anything that we would support as a measure of reproductive freedom.
Yeah, the answer is no. I don't have a problem with parental notification as a determining factor. The point is, where has telehealth got us awry? OxyContin, okay? So my point is, when you have no guardrails whatsoever and are admitting folks without a lot of thoughtfulness, bad things potentially can happen. I don't think that there should be a determinative requirement that there is parental notification, but I do think that we need to be careful with how we open up floodgates. Not that the dollars will be large, but I think we need to be responsible and thoughtful in terms of, you know, how we allow interstate commerce in this domain.
Mr. Bolton.
I just want,
Less than 30 seconds.
Less than 30 seconds, okay? I just want to have a quick rebuttal with regard to the conflation of my body, my choice with vaccines. My opponent pushed through the termination of the religious exemption to vaccines. If an abortion is something between you, your clergy, or you and your doctor, and it's a moral issue, then why isn't the same consideration being given to people who did not want to have their children or themselves vaccinated based on a religious exemption that was working just fine up until 2020? And the fact of the matter is that was pushed through in exchange with some horse swapping up in Hartford in exchange for another bill that Mr. Steinberg wanted to have a year later. That's the reality.
I have no idea what he's talking about.
Do I have time? I really try to adhere to the time requirement, but I'll...
What's going on? Is there a...
They're just 911 issues. I don't think we're having a problem here. So let's just
Oh my
wait for the phones to calm down, then we'll pick it back up. One of you wanted to answer? Or are we done?
I think we're done.
We're done with this question?
Yeah.
Okay. All righty. This is the last question directed to a specific person before we might be able to have time to send them out straight to discussion. Mr. Bolton, affordable housing. As a P&Z commissioner, you're well aware of the issues around affordable housing and the pressures that have been placed on all towns by the state. Is there an affordable housing crisis? Can 830G be modified? Is local control needed? If elected as a newbie, what would you do to address what is certainly an issue that will be hotly debated in the coming legislative year?
So I'm going to answer that in the macro and in the micro. And in the macro, as a state representative, I'm going to make sure that Westport sends a representative to Hartford that is the 8th zoning commissioner. It is very important. This is the biggest issue facing this town in this election year, hands down. Is there an affordable housing crisis? There's one in Connecticut, and there is one all over the country. And what are we going to do about it? It is so interconnected. It goes to supply chain issues. It goes to the wage issue. It goes to whether or not there should be prevailing wage statutes in Connecticut so that municipalities can bid competitively for jobs done. It is a massive issue that touches everybody, or every issue that we're gonna hopefully discuss here today. And if we don't get to it, I promise I'll make myself available after this debate to do that. Fact of the matter is that, does everybody remember, let me strike that. 830G was written by my law professor when I was in law school. It was written to attract more talent to the state of Connecticut. It was not done to address the grievances of racial inequality of the past, which nobody's going to dispute at some point happened. Fact of the matter is, as well-intentioned as it is a blunt instrument, it is a howitzer, and it completely disrupts the character of every single community in this town. Connecticut has home rule statute. There's a reason for that, because there is a concept that goes all the way back to when the Puritans came here, that the more local you are, you know what you need for your community. I worry about this runaway freight train. I crossed party lines and voted for the Affordable Housing Trust, which now almost has about $700,000 as of last week, and I'm really proud of that. But let me say something about that. I did that because I didn't have confidence that our representative was going to be telling our story up in Hartford with regard to the 128 units I referenced earlier that we get no credit for because we were forward-thinking. That's a punishment. I'm sorry. We should be getting credit for that. That's some bacon, folks. That's the bacon I was talking about earlier in the other questions. Because I have news for you. Roaring down the tracks is something called fair share, and that should scare all of you, because fair share is going to upend the way that we handle things in our town and every other town in Connecticut. It's going to put it in the hands of a bureaucrat at OPM, and I'm at zero, and as a zoning commissioner...
I was going to say, let's pick that up in discussion.
As a zoning commissioner, you know that I can't answer that in only 2 minutes, but thank you.
Probably not. Mr. Steinberg, 1 minute.
Well, he went over by about 45 seconds, so I'm not going to get that benefit.
I'll give you an extra 15.
Thank you. I agree with my opponent. 830G, however well-intentioned, is a blunt instrument that has benefited predatory developers and not the communities that it serves. I have sought to change 830G since I got there, often working with the Republicans. We've made some modest changes, but we haven't been able to get rid of the core bill. I sense an opportunity in this upcoming session because of the efforts in fair share, which, by the way, I led a coalition to defeat. So they ended up with a study bill. And I've also been able to shape bills like Work, Live, Ride, which seek to build density in urban areas. I've worked hard to get a seat at the table such that I will be able to shape bills going forward. I've worked hard to bring the successful Westport model to the legislature. I brought Daniel Dobin, our former chair of the Planning and Zoning Commission, to testify about what we're doing right. ADUs, middle housing, cluster housing, putting the development in the right places. And then we also have successes that came out like 122 Wilton Road, where we're actually taking an existing building and meeting our obligations for affordable housing in that fashion. There is an opportunity to change our affordable housing laws for the better, ultimately replacing 830G with a better law. I'm dedicated to that proposition. I've worked hard to make sure I'm part of the conversation. And you need a reasonable voice in Hartford who actually has a little bit of clout and relationships if we're going to see real change.
All right, thank you. Just to correct one thing about whether or not we have affordable housing or not in some of those units. Units that were created prior to 1990 don't get credit for the moratorium, but they are considered affordable housing if they're deed restricted. So there's this gray line where you are on.
Absolutely.
And I think that's something that is the case, but it's not that we don't get credit for the affordable housing of it, we don't get credit for the moratorium for them. So that's a slight...
And we are now on the tightrope of a moratorium, folks, which means it's going to be very difficult to stop a predatory developer from putting something in here that nobody wants. And again, it's an issue. Does everybody remember urban renewal back in the late 50s, 60s? What a disaster, okay? It created more poverty and created more problems than it was supposed to resolve. That's a fact. Well, guess what? 830G and Fair Share is suburban renewal. And it's going to create a disastrous effect for those who live in the suburbs because it doesn't take into account the unfunded mandates of additional infrastructure strain, education, law and order, and everything else that comes with higher density. And here's the news. Studies have been done by very reputable peer-reviewed planners. And I keep going back to this one from DePaul University, that people who now live in highly dense areas, they don't want to move just to go to more dense areas or the same kind of density. Everybody heard in the last 6 months around town, don't trade green space for green space. I get it. Well, guess what? Don't trade density for density. Our own governor has said that the infrastructure in the cities of our state are underutilized. Why? Good question. And why are we putting higher density into the suburbs that don't have the infrastructure that can handle it? The costs are going to be exponential. And guess what? Every one of you are going to be paying for it, and in all other 168 towns in our state.
Who wants to address that?
Yeah, it sounds like hopefully we have violent agreement on one issue, right? Affordable housing is a terrific issue affecting the competitiveness of this state, and we are, in fact, ranked either 1, 2, or 3 in the bottom of economic competitiveness on a number of different metrics. So we do need to figure out an affordable housing solution, but as others on this panel have said, the answer is not having Hartford tell us what to do. We understand our towns better than... I've lived in Lower Fairfield County all my life. I don't want... it's not a not in my backyard type issue. It is the destruction of the very quality of life of the neighborhoods that we have. We have more urban centers in South Norwalk, as an example, where larger buildings can be put on existing places. There are places with lots of vacancy in terms of office space. And by the way, Norwalk's already at 13%. So the question is, does Westport have the infrastructure that will allow it, infrastructure in terms of roads, in terms of school districts and the availability of essential services to allow a massive development right in the backyard of a very residential leafy area? The answer is probably no. So rather than have Hartford tell us how to do it, why don't we have us? We know our territories and our neighborhoods a lot better than Hartford does. Let us have control. We're working on it. Let us work towards a solution that doesn't destroy the very nature of why we came here in the first place.
Mr. Steinberg.
I think Westport is proving that it's not destroying our community. We are encouraging in the right places, and there are other models out there. Before I got to the legislature, there was a bill passed called Home Connecticut. It provided incentives rather than penalties to build affordable housing. It engaged communities, made sure that they had plans in place. And by the way, Westport's plan was lauded by the state for being as complete and thoughtful as any suburban community in the state. The problem was back then, we didn't have any money. We were in deficit. We're in a position now to institute a program like Home Connecticut, which could be a replacement for 830G. Forget about fair share. If anything that looks like fair share comes on the pike, it's not going to be what they were touting before. I'll make sure of that. But let's talk about programs that could actually replace 830G.
Ms. Johnson. If she was next.
May I make one other point? Another point I just thought
Oh,
about.
no, Mr. Bang, it was Ms. Johnson's time.
Are you?
You can speak after Ceci if you want.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Johnson.
Yes, I would just want to add to the conversation that we are already building so much in Norwalk that I would just say to especially my opponents, since 85% of this district is Norwalk, there's not much more room in Norwalk to build, to be honest. And so, you know, I think we should never see Norwalk as just the answer to why other communities shouldn't build, right? We're already kind of at capacity, as far as I'm concerned, in Norwalk, and have to make very smart growth decisions now because we have even more development coming down the line. We're revitalizing on Wall Street, which is very important, and that's been literally decades in the making. I have friends that remember as a kid the flood and what that did to devastate that community. But aside from that, South Norwalk is already getting built up quite a lot, and there's a lot of development in the pipeline. So just to say, I think that when it comes to the Westport side of this delegation, we have been, like Representative Steinberg in the House, together, the two of us have been very much working as a team to make sure that your voices are heard on specifically fair share. Thank you.
Ms. Maher.
Okay, thank you. So I want to go back to 830G. When it was instituted, there was a definite need for housing in the state. There still is. I just want to point out that under 830G, 147,000 homes were built. 147,000, that is not small potatoes, okay? But I also want to say that Westport is really a model. You have been doing a great job. You have inclusionary zoning. It is thoughtful planning. I believe that we need housing. We talked about taxes earlier. We cannot bring in more businesses without housing for people to live. When the governor talks to businesses and works with Dan O'Keefe from Department of Ed, Commission on Economic Development, well, that's one of the first things that the businesses say is where are my people going to live? So we must determine where the housing can be in order to grow our economy. And by growing our economy and increasing corporate taxes, we reduce taxes on individuals. That's just a fact. Lastly, I've been working, I know this isn't Westport, but it is part of the district, up at Gilbert and Bennett, which is an exact example of what we need to be doing, is refurbishing old buildings that are sitting vacant and empty and put mixed-use housing and small, light manufacturing and retail into that area. That sits at the intersection of 4 towns in the district. So we've brought brownfield remediation in there. We've brought funding to do sewer research on capacity, and we've brought in funding for planning. The goal being that sits right on a train line. It's at the intersection of 4 towns. It is absolutely the kind of thing that is visionary and we should be thinking about across the district and the state.
Mr. Bang.
I just wanted to say, one of the things that we continually fail to appreciate is unintended consequences. And here's a great example. We're focused on 830G. It sounds like we are both thoughtful and trying to be forward-thinking on these issues. But how about what we're doing to make it hard for mom and pop landlords to convert an accessory dwelling unit? Will that not impact rental prices across the district? Will that not also mitigate some of the issues around large corporate developers trying to plop a 12-story building in a place where it doesn't belong, where the infrastructure isn't there? So we make it very difficult for mom and pop landlords by mandating an electric vehicle charging station if the tenant requires one or requests one. We make it difficult for them to evict a tenant who has outstayed their term. Imagine if you had an elderly family member that you wanted to bring into an apartment above a garage, and you said to a tenant, I can only take you for 12 months, or I can only take you for 18, because mom needs to come in. And the tenant says, aha, I can just outlive my lease, continue to pay rent, and you can't kick me out. So why are we doing that? That's an issue of unintended consequences that our legislators are failing to understand. We need to look at housing holistically, and the issues around big corporate developers are an issue, but we also need to think about what we're doing to make it difficult for individual mom and pop landlords to attract people into ADUs.
Thank you, Mr. Bang. Mr. Bolton.
The application of 830G is being used as a Band-Aid to remedy a lot of other issues and societal ills that come from intended bad consequences of a supermajority. Because when you have a supermajority, you're not accountable. That's a fact. The real issue is that my opponent did find the light on this issue, but not in round one. In round one, you were on board with the study. When I'm your representative, no study that says fair share is going to make it past my desk without being dead on arrival, because it's not even close to representing the values of our town. I have shown for the last 2.5 years, 3.5, that I understand the electorate of this town, and I got news for you. That's not there's not a whole lot of difference between the two major parties in this town on this issue. In fact, very little. We joined forces last February at the RTM to make sure that Affordable Housing Trust Fund got passed. And it's because I thought it was a great prophylactic to make sure that some unelected, faceless bureaucrat at OPM doesn't tell us how to lead our lives down here. And I apologize if I offended anybody earlier. I get passionate about this one issue. Fact of the matter is, the leader of the fair share legislation has shown nothing but tremendous disdain for this part of the state. He's on the record as saying so. When and if I get the privilege to go to Hartford, I'm going to make this promise. I invite Commissioner Bruno of Housing, and I invite Ernie Rojas to spend a day with me here in Westport so that they can see what a community we have here, and how generous we are and how caring we are for those who can't take care of themselves. We've been doing it for a long time, and no one's telling that story. I will.
Thank you, Ms. Evans.
Just a few quick things. The area that Senator Maher was speaking about, I've spoken to a lot of the constituents there, and they are mortified. They don't want to build that area for affordable housing. There's a difference also between affordable housing and low-income housing, so we need to unpack that as well. Because we're all living and we're talking so long. I just wrote an article for Good Morning Bolton on housing unit equivalents. So I just recommend everybody look at that op-ed piece. But I'd like to also give my time over to Peter. Peter, I was just saying.
You have more to say,
but
Mr. Bang?
I wanted to have, because he has a very good point that he shared with me before about the chargers.
Well, no, we're going to go to Mr. Steinberg next, and then Mr. Bang can raise his hand.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah, that's how it works.
Sorry.
I just want to give people here an insight as to how things actually happen in Hartford. The only reason that I have a seat at the table is because I engaged early, and I don't like the way you have maligned Representative Rojas, who has been to Westport, who's been very open-minded. He has allowed me to have a seat at the table. We shaped the Work, Live, Ride legislation, and when I didn't get what I wanted, I built a coalition of moderate Democrats to go with Republicans to defeat fair share in its current form. That ended up in a study bill. A study bill, by the way, is a victory. Now, what happens next year is up to us. And I will have a seat at the table to come up with legislation that will meet Westport needs and be good for everybody in the state. That happens when you participated in the process, built relationships, and have credibility.
I have to respond to that. I absolutely have to respond to that.
All right, well, since it was your question, go for it.
Thank you very much. I have a lot of respect for my opponent, and I respect the public service that he's given throughout his entire career. The fact of the matter is he's had 14 years to address this issue. And nothing has been accomplished on behalf of this town and this electorate on this one issue. Nothing. I know he disagrees with me on this, but I've been on zoning for 3.5 years. And I love every commissioner on zoning. I don't care what party they're on. They're smart people. We've never been briefed, never once been briefed by our representative as to the doings up in Hartford with Fair Share. I'm sorry, but I think we deserve that deference as elected officials in this town. I really do. Number two, what I said about Representative Rojas, I'm not maligning him. I am just referencing a quote that he put out in the Hartford Courant that I thought was very disparaging about our community and in some ways about the representation from down here. I also took it as an attack on you. You can't reference Democrats from Fairfield County and its electorate as hoarders of social capital. If somebody can give me a positive spin on what that means, I'm all ears.
Thank you, Mr. Bolton. Mr. Bang, did you want to take that time? No, you didn't. Ms. Maher, you looked like you wanted to speak?
Yeah, I do.
Go ahead.
Thanks. When I talk about Gilbert and Bennett renovating that entire, and it is a huge piece of property, and I said affordable housing. Well, of course, it's affordable housing, it's low-income housing, it's workforce housing, it's housing in every shape and form because that has been a focus of the select people, of the elected first select woman of Reading. It has been a focus of the entire town. The Georgetown business area is so excited about the idea of having that happen. Now, I'm not saying it's happening tomorrow. It's a 5 to 8 year time frame, but after being there for over 20 years through my work in the past 2 years, we have moved it along to the point that we can actually see a future there. And it will benefit the sections of Branchville, as I said, Weston, Wilton, Reading, and Richfield.
Thank you. We good?
Yeah, we're done.
All right, so we're sort of in a Midland period here. We could ask one more question. I've got two. So I'll let you guys decide which question you want. You want to talk about transportation or you want to talk about climate change?
Climate.
What do we got? Climate? No, either.
Fine. Whatever everybody else is comfortable with.
We'll go climate, since that was the first person who
One
nodded.
and the same.
What's that?
Transportation and climate change. Okay.
They very well may be.
all-
It depends on how you answer the
go
question. We're going to make this a quick one, and then we're going to go to summations. So, climate change. Westport and our fellow communities are,
Who's first?
it's going to be open discussion. So whoever wants to talk about it, we've exhausted the 6 straight questions, so we're good. Westport and our fellow communities up and down the coast are experiencing change in weather. It's nice to be walking around in shorts and a t-shirt in October, like today. But reality is that storms are getting bigger, more frequent, and Connecticut Deep is predicting that there will be sea rise that will be affecting our communities. We as a state can't stop global warming, but should we be preparing for it? And what are your thoughts on how to do that? Ms. Evans.
So as I shared before, I live in 850 square feet, so I have a small carbon footprint, and my family also has a recycling business throughout the U.S. and down in Puerto Rico. So sustainability and focusing on being very clear about our carbon footprint is very important to me. I may have a different perspective because I have this access and ability to look at the whole life cycle of even plastics and how it affects our communities, and especially with, unfortunately, the way that we dispose of plastics in Fairfield County is incredibly alarming as well. I think that it does affect climate as well, and I do think there's opportunities to, as we weren't going to talk about maybe transportation and traffic, but to encourage people to utilize the trains going to and from certain cities, towns within our areas and really benefit from those opportunities.
Okay, thank you. Let me just throw in that our trains, Metro North runs up and down the coast, deep in their map saying by 2020, 25, 2030, some of those train tracks will be underwater. So let's keep going and talk about this before we close. Mr. Bang.
Yeah, so I'd like to virtue signal as well. I have 2 electric vehicles, geothermal and solar. Let's put things in perspective as well. By virtue of having Metro North, by virtue of having a lot of us commute into New York City, we probably have amongst the lowest carbon footprints around. So this becomes a more, it's posed to a panel of state representatives, but it's also about national policy. And is Connecticut getting its fair share relative to other more consumptive, more carbon footprint, aggressive states and regions? But let's stop and let's think again about incentives. I chose geothermal, I chose solar, and I chose to pay for it, whether there was a tax incentive or not. So the big question is, are we looking to legislate and provide giveaways for favored industries explicitly or in the back door? So I'll go back to the 30% Eversource. If we're putting in little pet projects around green energy, why don't we make that explicit? If that's what we want to do as a society and we want to fund and invest in those industries, as we should,
Okay.
why would we bury that inside a 30% rate hike that affects our most vulnerable and those on fixed income? Let's be honest about it.
Thank you, Mr. Beck. Ms. Johnson.
I think that we fundamentally, as a region, have an important role to play in the climate crisis. We have actually some of the most consumptive, because of the amount of driving we have to do, because of the types of cars we have. We really actually do, I think, I have a different perspective on this than Mr. Bang, because we do produce a lot of, our carbon footprint is not minimal here in Fairfield County. We also have some of the worst pollution in the entire state because it comes in from Ohio. We have pollution from New York City. So in the urban core areas, we have higher rates of asthma, heat island effects. We're experiencing this right now. And we see what happens when the king tides come in. I've been really proud to work with legislators across the aisle in the Green Jobs Corps. Unfortunately, we couldn't get the Connecticut Climate Protection Act over the finish line this past session because of, unfortunately, some partisan politics around climate. That was a bill that could actually have paved the way for us to ensure that we had federal funding coming into the state to make sure we develop the workforce we need to create a clean energy future, to make sure that we have training programs, and to make sure that we actually invest in our entrepreneurship and our small businesses in the state that are going to create the startups to perhaps solve some of the most wicked problems we have on the climate. Fundamentally, these programs, and I think that anybody, regardless of your economic situation, that has taken part of them, is trying to do their part. And I think that fundamentally we cannot be partisan about climate change anymore because it affects all of us. I'm proud of the work we've done. I think we need to move forward. And unfortunately, if we're facing partisanship around this issue, I can absolutely guarantee that you have climate champion here.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Mr. Bolton.
Anytime I question the science of climate change, I do it on an esoteric level. And that means that I want to make sure there's no disputing that there is a warming that's going on. However, the person who theorized about climate change, Dr. Judith Curry, came up with this entire theory right around and right after Katrina. And it became politicized because Bush was president during Katrina. That's a fact, okay? Whether or not it's causing, or excuse me, whether or not the cause of global warming or climate change is from the carbon footprint or other issues, I think needs to be studied more. I'm just gonna say one thing on a very local level. We have to decide, and I'm down with whatever our electorate decides, but we have to decide what we want to be. And if anybody can name one thing that comes into a pharmacy or a drugstore, other drugstore, or our supermarket that doesn't come in on a truck, a fossil fuel powered truck, that doesn't affect our economy, over here, over there, pharmacies are closing. You don't want to know why? Because it's becoming too expensive to bring goods in that underwrite the cost of pharmacies. That's a fact.
Thank you, Mr.
And it's all going back to climate change. So let's just think about it very thoroughly, and let's be smart about it before we act. Please, let's not do this on emotion. Let's do this on logic. That's all I'm asking.
Thank you, Mr. Bolton. Ms. Maher. Does anybody else after Jonathan? All right.
So I want to thank
We'll end with you then. Okay.
Representative Johnson for bringing up the House Bill 5004, because I worked on that also starting last summer, and we were working very hard to make sure that that bill got through, and it did not get through the legislature, much to our dismay. I also worked with representatives from the governor's office on Senate Bill 11, which was the governor's bill on climate, which was a slightly different bill in that it was focused more on carrots rather than sticks. And some of the things that they were looking at was putting together districts to create bonding, so environmental districts, to create bonding capacity for those districts, to look at things like roads, to look at things like brooks, Dead Man's Brook comes to mind, to look at waterways and the impact of sea rise. And to your point about train tracks, anyone who's taken Amtrak up to Boston knows that at certain points you're going right along the waterway, and that is a serious infrastructure issue on transportation, both for Metro North and for Amtrak. Next session, I will be working again on the bill or several bills on environment to try and get them over the finish line, because it is so important, not just for our communities, it is also important for our children's mental health, because it is impacting my children in the way they think about their future, and it's impacting young children who are afraid because of climate change. I think we have got to do something about that, and every single step we can take, I know we're a small state, but there are things we can do to make a difference. Just one simple thing alone is changing the way we pitch our roads and planning roads for water overflow on them. And that is, I'm sorry, okay.
No, it's okay. You could sum up, but you were going on. 30 seconds, Mr. Steinberg.
I agree with my colleague that anybody who says Connecticut doesn't have a role to play in climate change is just a cop-out. We all have a role to play. Connecticut has been making headway in a variety of things. I was very proud to be involved with banning plastic bags on a statewide basis, getting rid of microplastics, dealing with PFAS. There are things I could talk about. Let me focus on just one or two. One is waste management. We have a real problem in this state. We can't ship our garbage anymore to India or China. We need a better answer. I've been championing a new technology called pyrolic gasification, which can eviscerate molecules, including PFAS, mattresses, medical sharps, you name it. This is something we can do throughout the state that will actually take care of our wastewater management problem. But I'm also glad that you brought up flooding. This is a problem we have right here in Westport. And CIRCA, a collaboration between DEEP and UConn, is helping communities plan for flooding, plans for changes in the floodplain. This is an issue that touches Westport directly, but is also a statewide issue.
Thank you. All right. So we're going to go to summations, and we're going to go in the opposite order that we started in. So we're going to start with Mr. Bolton for 1 minute, and then we're just going to continue right on down the line.
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank everybody here today who took time out in the middle of their day to come and attend, because it's heartening to all of us. It's very important that we continue a dialogue with our electorate, not just during election season, but 24/7, 365. And a big reason why I was motivated to accept my party's nomination to take on Mr. Steinberg, a 14-year incumbent, is because it is my humble opinion that our voice is not being properly heard in Hartford. I will go up to Hartford, not as a Republican and not as a Democrat, but as a Westporter, to tell our story on every issue that's been discussed today's debate, last week's debate, and the week before that. Very important. And with the greatest of respect for his public service, it has been 14 years of unremarkable representation that does not allow us to move forward as a community. And when we talk about bringing home the bacon, bacon has many definitions to me. It's not just about money. It's not just about vests. It's about waivers. It's about recognition. And it's about getting the model that was discussed earlier of Westport and affordable housing being told it's not being told. I simply want to go to Westport and be there for all of you.
Thank you, Mr. Bolton. Mr. Steinberg.
Let me be clear, I like bacon, but I love Westport, and I've been proud to serve as your representative for the past 14 years. Your investment in me yields dividends. I have relationships in Hartford. I understand the process, and I reject his claim that I have not been successful. I can enumerate any number of bills that I've been a champion of that made a huge difference to the people of the state of Connecticut and right here in Westport. And if his best argument is that we have a supermajority that needs to be contained, by the way, there is no supermajority in the House, that to me falls a pretty lame argument. I would like the opportunity to return to Hartford because I am known as having a steady hand and a voice that people listen to. That matters when you're trying to get things done. Legislation is a game of compromise, and that's what it's going to take if we're going to bring about the kind of positive change we need here in Connecticut. I ask for your support to return to Hartford because there's plenty of hard work that needs to be done, and I'm prepared to do it. Thank you.
Right on the button, Mr. Steinberg. Thank you. Ms. Maher.
Hi, thanks so much, Matt, for doing this again. And also, I just want to say, you know, I've lived in Connecticut almost all my life, except when I was for a little while in New York. Darn it. And I have years and years and years of work here in Connecticut, 20 years of working in the nonprofit space where I have relationships across Fairfield County. And those relationships have served me incredibly well up in Hartford because I can reach out to anyone with an issue, a question, and get answers. I've worked hard in the past 2 years. I created the Office of Behavioral Health Advocate with a patient navigator so that we can address our children's behavioral health crisis. I have put in place an application for behavioral health intake for children that is being developed right now by the Department of Public Health. And I have passed bills as a freshman senator which create a change for Connecticut. I know, but my phone was ringing. I had to turn it off, so I'm ignoring you. Sorry. So anyway, all of those...
10 seconds.
Okay, all of those pieces that came together to make me a successful legislator are only a portion, because the other portion is the responsiveness to the communities and my willingness to be anywhere, anytime to help people. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Maher. Ms. Evans, 1 minute.
Thank you. With a platform of over 150,000 members, I spotlight and support organizations that make a real difference. I've encouraged others to use my platforms, such as the Westport Weston Chamber of Commerce, Weston Today, and Good Morning Wilton. I also work closely with local media outlets and provide insight to help connect local opportunities with profits and nonprofits, ensuring that our community stays informed. I've received a congressional honor from Senator Blumenthal for my community impact, and I've also had the opportunity to have the same honor given to Beechwood Arts as well as the Westport Museum for History and Culture. I also had an opportunity to have the same award given to a telehealth-focused business called You Are Heard that focuses on mental health for high school and college students. I've built strong relationships across the spectrum, the political spectrum, and will use those opportunities to bring change to our district in Hartford. Together we can create a brighter, more innovative future. And now I ask for your vote, and I look forward to serving you in Hartford. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Evans. Mr. Bang, 1 minute.
Thank you very much. Thank you again. The word dystopian was used earlier today. Nothing is dystopian right now, especially on a beautiful day like we have today. So again, thank you for spending your time with us today. There is a difference between dystopian and factual and sober assessment of where we stand. And our competitive position is not good. We talked about the $100 billion in unfunded pension liabilities. We talked about how reliant our tax base is on federal funds as well as the vagaries of the stock market. Look, if there were 40 years of Republican control, I'd be worried too. There'd be tired, lazy thinking, an unwillingness to look and be thoughtful and creative about new solutions to problems. How many times here do we say, that's the way it's done in Hartford? And I will admit that there is a very important part of legislation, as Rep. Steinberg said, about compromise and about reaching across the aisle. But where's the creativity? Where's the willingness to stretch and say, have we thought about this a different way? That's what I think we need. And with that, I'd ask for your vote.
Thank you, Mr. Bang. Ms. Johnson, 1 minute.
I want to thank you all again for being here today, everyone at home watching. I have worked over the past 2 years with a passion for you, for people, because I know that is exactly why I'm here at this microphone speaking today, to ask for your support for another 2 years. I report to you directly. And so some of the best ideas that we come up with literally are because we've talked in the community, I've come to your doorstep, and that kind of creative thinking is something that I've brought to my work in Hartford. I'm a coalition builder. I have over 25 endorsements, including the Independent Party, because I work across the aisle to get things done. I roll up my sleeves, and I'm a pragmatic legislator, delivering results to make life just a bit better for us here at home. And I want to tell you, when I make a decision, of course I ask myself what is best for our community, but I also close my eyes. And every time when I close my eyes, I think about your kids. I think about the kids in my family. I think about our families, our elders, my aunt, your grandfather, and what will make life better for them. And I do and put that all into the heart of what I do for you. And I want to be as excessive and accessible and as responsive as I've been over the past years, because you deserve that. So thank you very much. I'm Dominique Johnson, your state representative, and I hope I earn your vote in the next 2 weeks by November 5th.
Thank you very much. All right, nice job, everybody. So thank you for attending. I just want to let you know that, am I on? Yeah. I want to let you know that the Chamber of Commerce is hosting a post-election concert on Saturday the 9th. It's going to be right here in the library. Fantastic band. It's part of our Supper and Soul Dinner and Concert Series. The band is called Pajamas. Thank you all for attending. But most importantly, on November 5th, go out and vote. But if you can't be there on November 5th, you can walk right over to Town Hall right now and you can do early voting. That's what's most important about our democracy. Make sure that you do vote. Thank you all for attending. Thanks again for the library for hosting. Good afternoon, everybody.